Thanks very much for having this item on the agenda so that we can all debate it and that our public are able to observe the debate that we hold today. So this is a report from the Innovation and Sustainable Development Committee held on Monday the 20th of May, declaration of a climate change and ecological emergency, and I'd like to invite the chair of the committee to introduce the report.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to those people who came to the council some time ago suggesting this. This has gone through the Innovation and Sustainability Committee, and these are the recommendations that we've made. But I just want to emphasise that the declaration of a climate and ecological emergency is not about any sort of top-down governance. For this to work, everybody has to take action. And if we all have an average emission of 6.6 tonnes in Christchurch, then we need to talk to each other about how we're going to reduce that to 5 and then 4 and then 3. And businesses need to do the same, and every community group. So this is not an emergency in terms of a civil defence emergency. It's quite the opposite. It's about all of us taking combined action to do things. And in fact, I think if you look on that on a wide scale, the 7.6 billion people that are on the planet at the moment are at a moment in history where the future history of everyone will be determined by their actions. So it's important that each of us make changes, and each business makes changes, each council makes changes, each government makes changes. So we want to work with people, and that's why a lot of the suggestions that were made in the submissions are coming back to Innovation and Sustainability Committee for more detailed reports, because it was difficult to make decisions without those reports on various things, including communication, including high visibility targets. So just when you're, similar to when you're raising money for a swimming pool, when you see how much more you need to raise, how are we getting on with the carbon emissions? How is that actually working? But I think the urgency of the climate crisis is such that we have no choice but to declare a climate and ecological emergency. That's very real. I don't think anybody can say that we're not faced with that. But I think the important thing in Christchurch, and I know Christchurch has got its own way of operating, is that it's really important that we do this in conjunction with everybody else, that it's not the council leading or just the council taking these actions. This is Christchurch as a whole making decisions, debating, talking, wanting to know what more can be done, and a whole range of actions need to come from that. And as you'll note from the notes here, there is 2 more reports coming back to the next 2 meetings of Innovation and Sustainability on this, and then the council itself will look at the whole city-wide target, and no doubt consult very extensively on how we're going to get there in terms of what is the appropriate date. Obviously, in terms of the work that's already underway on climate change, it's not a comprehensive list, it's just a series of examples of what's underway. It definitely doesn't cover everything that is. But I think the key thing is that a lot of people have said to us, this is really urgent, treat it with the urgency that it needs. I don't think any of us can put our hand on our heart and say there isn't a climate crisis. I certainly can't look at my kids and tell them there is no climate crisis that they're facing. And it's really important that all of us are actually dealing with this and working on it. That's why I think the issue of becoming the overarching objectives in our key strategic documents is really, really important. It recognises that importance for all of us. So the committee has accepted this with 1 vote against and recommends it to the council today.
Thank you. So who wants to move the recommendations? I have a few. Okay, so it's moved by Sarah and second by Vicky. And before I open it up for debate, I just want to signal that I've been doing a bit of work on the plane on the way back, because there are some amendments that I'd like to put up, and it is very much last minute, and I do apologise, but I simply haven't had time to do this until I got on a plane. So but I will continue to work during the course of the debate on some of the issues that I want to raise. But I take great comfort from the fact that Vicky has outlined the importance of ensuring the democratic participation of our communities in both establishing targets and committing to achieve those, because there is no point, an organisation committing to do something if the people themselves are not going to basically contribute to that in a meaningful way. So that is a level of engagement that we need to have with our communities. And of course the other thing is to really focus on the need for a just and equitable transition, because this is about transitioning away from our reliance on carbon, and justice and equity are an important component. And if we don't have justice and equity, we will have people left behind, and the sense of being left behind will actually not enable all of our communities to engage on all of these issues. So, Sarah, since you've moved the motion, would you like to open the debate on it, and then during the course of that I'll work out some amendments.
Before we start the debate, is it possible to amend the first one to say a global climate and ecological emergency? Because I'm not sure what that refers to.
Yes?
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I thought there was an amendment around working with our other councils and other TAs in this area and regional council. Good. I just want to make sure it's there, please.
It's moved by you. It's there.
Yeah. I've been, as I say, I picked up that whole question around some of our Greater Christchurch and regional planning documents, because if we don't engage on the Greater Christchurch basis and on the regional basis, then we're not actually committing to the work that needs to be done. Yep. Right. Yeah. I am sorry, but I haven't got the specific amendments kind of detailed yet. So I'll just work on those and then I'll put them up. Yanni.
So for a number of years, we've had there's been concern that we don't seem to have any clear indicators. Raf's council.
No, hang on. This isn't the debate.
No, I understand. So I'm just trying to understand from the committee, because obviously those of us haven't heard the deputations from people. So was there any discussion around a series of indicators, high-level indicators, that we could easily publicly display that would show progress? And I raise that in the context of the Central City Review as well, being very damning around the lack of environmental indicators for our Central City Recovery Plan, or for the government's Central City Blueprint.
So I guess this is recognising that not all councillors are on that committee. So I'm happy to throw these to you, Vicky, if that's
because I'm happy to move
suitable.
an amendment to try and get work on that being done. If it's not,
Feel free,
I'd personally like to do that.
The whole communications and how we involve groups, individuals, businesses in telling their stories as well about what they're actually doing. So we've talked initially to Newsline about that and how we can use that, but what other things that we can do such that everybody's efforts can be told about, but also so that that high visibility can be there. So it's probably an average emission per person in Christchurch, but we will look at that, and that is coming back to us in the next 2 months.
So could we maybe just
Feel free.
A note to that we would like to see some high-level environmental indicators?
For you to answer those questions.
I did actually think that was all part of the reporting framework for the Global Covenant that we've signed up to. Is that not? No, we signed up. The council approved. Anyway.
For 8 years, we've been trying to get a sustainability clock in the middle of the square showing, the sustainability of the rebuild. And it's lots of talk, but we never seem to have any clear...
One of the things is that the actions, so this is about the statement of the fact of the emergency, the state of the environment. The actions that flow from that are the next stage. And there's already lots of work happening. It's good to note stuff, but it's, yeah.
Being noted. Yep.
If we can come up with some...
You've got no problem.
even when we're getting the reviews into our big anger projects,
Yep.
the closeout reports, there's no discussion around the carbon impact.
Okay. All right. So what I'll do is I don't know. Yeah. All right. Look. So have you got a question? No. Well, if we're ready for the debate, then Sarah, I'll get you to open the debate.
Thank you. Today's words are just that. They're words on a screen and on bits of paper. They're not rates rises in spite of any political positioning I've heard, and they're not decisions yet on any actions. However, it's simply not good governance of public assets and our city to fail to protect them from foreseeable future threats. We're currently ruining the failure of successive councils' lack of investment in an ageing water reticulation system. And when it comes time to invest in mitigating the impacts of climate change on our city, future generations will look back on us with frustration if we opt for short-term political cycle business as usual decision making. I've also heard concern that today's declaration doesn't bring the community with us, but that completely misses the point. The climate emergency is a statement of fact, part one of a 2 or 3 part process. After the earthquakes, we didn't consult on whether or not the city was broken. We said that it was, and then we consulted on what to do about it. Today, we state the fact that the planetary climate and ecological systems are in breakdown, and next we work with the community on what to do about it. The climate strategy referenced in the resolution. And whatever good decisions we have already made as a council, and whatever we decide to do in the future, as long as our emissions are still rising, which they are, it isn't enough. However, today's resolutions are not just words. They are clear and unequivocal, and words have power. It was a list of names on a petition that led to women's suffrage, a speech about dreams that helped win black civil rights in the US, and a list of cities declaring what they had no statutory power to enact that led to a nuclear-free New Zealand. Words have power because words inspire action. And this is why we choose them carefully, why we can choose to scaremonger or choose to be brave and to tell the truth, to have the tough conversations with our communities about what to do and to act.
Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm a bit caught because I have to catch a plane, so I'm just going to put that out there. I need to go at 2, and I don't know what my colleagues will do, but this needs a good debate, and the amendments need to be debated thoroughly, so there's a chance I can't leave my finger behind to go like that. But my support for this, I am not caught on. It's on the record. As I said the other day, this is a clarion call. We are into extra time as a planet. We've been in crisis for some time. There has been, and I pick up the comment made, this will add to rates, and that comment was put forward without any substance, no detail. What I will tell you is last year when we for instance, the day after we launched our Yugo car share scheme, we had the launch of the South Island's first front-loading rubbish truck, and at the time we had information, it was so many thousands of litres of diesel a day if we converted those trucks to electricity. And I can tell you those operational savings will have a significant impact on your rates, because it's the OPEX that affects the rates. Capital you can spread, operational is a constant. If we follow through on what this is today, this is a declaration of intention. If we make good on this, I would like to think long term we will see huge savings in our rates for all. And I actually challenge anyone to come at us to say that agreeing with this today will result in rate increases. It will result in the opposite. There are more savings to come. We're making explicit what we've been doing for a long time. This is a declaration of intention today with our work program to then cascade from that. So I'm going to leave it to. I probably won't be here to vote, but I did the other day, no question about that, but as I explained at the beginning, I'm just caught with a plane I have to catch.
Thank you. Pauline?
Look, I'm looking at the chairperson's recommendations, and I really like number 2, which is indicating to make climate change leadership and safe sustainable water the 2 overarching equal objectives of our key strategic documents. And that means that everything we do, every decision we make, those 2 principles are integral in our decision making. And I think it's really important that we do continue to address and point out what this council is already doing in this area. And that's been noted in the chairperson's report. But what we haven't pointed out, and I think it's really important, is the amount of native forest that we're replanting in the city itself. And that's largely done through the Land Drainage Recovery Program, which is taking opportunities for betterment, like the Linwood Fields, the Cranford Basin, the Bullers Stream area around the QE2 Drive there, and the Papanui Bush, and other areas. So this is huge, I think, progress. So I think also that 53% of our emissions come from transport in our city. So I think targeting transport is a good start. Red Bus, our council-owned buses, have just about to launch 3 electric buses, and I think that's really commendable. And let's have more electric buses or zero-emission buses if we can. But on a personal level, why don't we all adopt some car-free days? If you drive your car 7 days and leave your car behind for 2 or 3 days a week, you're creating a huge benefit to move ourselves towards a carbon-free city. So it's these small personal targets we need to encourage, plus also letting people know what this council is already doing. So this is a great day, I think, for Christchurch.
Brad?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure I can support all of the items on here. I've got questions about a number of them, but I will support the main one, which is the declaration. I'd much prefer we use the word acknowledgement rather than declaration, but that's kind of semantics. I sort of looked back on a paper I wrote in 2008 called Climate Control. It's online. And my opening line, and this shows you how far things have moved on a little bit, I say global warming, which we don't use anymore, is one of the great eco-societal challenges facing humankind. To date, international agreement on the way to deal with this has not been achieved due to the complexity of the proposals and the inequitable distribution of costs, which the Mayor sort of referred to before. There is no doubt this is a slow-burning but critical issue that we do have to address, but I think we've got to address it in the right way. So I'd like to be clear, I'm acknowledging the criticality of this issue. I'd also like to recognise the impulse and actions of the various groups that are requesting the declaration. And, social activism is important, doesn't always please everyone, but that's how change often gets made. So I'd like to acknowledge that as well. I mean, some of the issues I have with the actual paper that we're debating. One, our national response to the climate change challenge is in Parliament. It's the Zero Carbon Bill, and I think that's where we should be focusing our energy, and that's where people should be focusing their input and their feedback through the select committee process. Secondly, we are actually in the process of consulting on our own city's climate change strategy. So we don't actually have that nutted out yet. That's open actually till May the 31st. So I'd actually prefer to wait till we get that strategy defined before we jump to any specific decisions. And I think there are some issues in here which I would actually have questions about, such as a question, what would that question be? And changing our strategic documents without proper investigation by council, I think, is probably a step too far. Another thing that worries me is that these types of declarations do often set up unrealistic and unmanageable expectations in terms of what can actually be delivered at the local level and the impact on what is a global issue. You know, if China, India, Russia, the US do not change their ways, what we do is actually not going to shift the dial, unfortunately. I'm sorry, global population is accelerating. It's accelerating in those areas. So, you know, we have to kind of manage those expectations. And I think it's important. And using the word emergency is, you know, for a city that has gone through a lot of emergencies in recent years, you know, does give me cause for pause. And it does, you know, potentially raise expectations. And if results aren't seen, it can have negative impacts on mental health. So, you know, we need a clearly thought out 50 to 100 year climate change strategy for this city and for this country. And those processes are underway. A suggestion I have in terms of what...
Thank you. Yeah, we're
I haven't finished.
time.
Well, one thing I do want to say, which is important, is actually building on the success of the Christchurch call and the global impact we've had there. We could actually, the mayor's just come back from Japan, we could write to the G20 requesting that they consider convening a meeting with the world's largest 20 producers of fossil fuels in order to explore the setting of a global quota on production. That is something that would have an impact. And that's something I think that we could use the current global coverage that we've got to actually start that process.
Andrew.
Thank you. Is climate change important? Yes, it is. Is climate change real? Absolutely. Can we take urgent action to combat climate change, and should we do that? Yes, we can, and yes, we should. And when should we do that? We should do it now. Council can play a leadership role within what we do within our own organisation and decisions that we make, the way that we build buildings, the way that we prioritise, how we take climate change and ecological issues and give those significant weight through our decision making and the things that we influence and the things that we do. But also, we're in an almost unique position, I think, to play a leadership role within the communities that we engage with as we go about our work. We can lead discussion, we can take action to help and allow communities to understand what they can do in partnership with us as council, in partnership with government, in partnership with other agencies, collectively and as individuals, to give effect to real change which will have beneficial effect on what really is a climate and ecological crisis that we are facing. This is urgent, and in our leadership role we need to take the steps that we can. We need to take the leadership position that we can, and we need to do that now. The question for me really is, you know, we can talk about a climate emergency, a climate change emergency, a climate change and ecological emergency, as many others worldwide have done. This is something that's gained currency in recent months, and it's likely it should. But what does this mean, and what are we going to do about it, is really what this is about. And some of the debate today is focused on that. There are a number of things that we're already doing, and some of those are referenced in the report that's in front of us today. There are a number of things that we're planning to do, and certainly there are further steps that we can take and that we need to have regard to as we prioritise and make decisions to take a lead in this area. I also want to turn to this suggestion that there is an inevitability that this will result in rates rises. Council clearly is in control of its own budget setting. Council is clearly in control of the budget envelopes that it sets, and it's also in control of the priorities within which it makes its decisions within that budget envelope and within the parameters of the budgets that we set. So I'm absolutely confident that Council will continue to have regards to rate rises, and we've heard from communities their view of that, and of course we'll have regard to that. We'll continue to exercise restraint in our budgets. We'll continue to exercise a prudent financial strategy, and if we need to prioritise differently as a result of a additional or new or particular focus on climate change effects or on the effects of what we're doing on ecological outcomes, then that forms a part of the way that we exercise priority within our budgets. It does not inevitably or necessarily in any way mean that the budgets will change and rates will rise. So I think it's important we do this today. And I encourage colleagues to vote in favour of either the recommendations we've got in front of us, or obviously we've possibly got something else coming that may be reflective of what we're talking about today.
Phil. Phil? I said Phil. I called you. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm strongly supporting all of these recommendations, and I'm pleased, and I expect that councillors will also support the Part 7 there, where in fact we talk and work with other local councils and regional council to make sure this also happens. It's quite clear that at a time of an emergency, that is when we need to work together, and we'll do so with our other councils and other major cities. Because and one area around important reason to work with our other councils is that we know that transport is the biggest contributor, over 50%, to our carbon emissions, and it's essential that we stop the urban sprawl that's happening both to north and south of the city, so that in fact we rein in transport costs. And while in fact it's been indicated that in fact there's no need for this emergency, well in fact it is. It is really a recognition of the speed that's going to be required to actually mitigate and stop the worst aspects of climate change and the way they're affecting our communities. I was in the Kahurangi National Park over Easter time doing the Hefe track, and I was incredibly sad to see the number of beech and kowhai trees that died during the recent drought. And if we get another drought, boy, is that climate change starting to kill our national parks. This is an emergency in my view. And I want to say there's plenty of scope for continuing the people power, which has really, I guess, brought this to our attention. In the late 1960s, I was still at high school, and we had a campaign to save Lake Manapori. The government at the time wanted to raise Lake Manapori to 150 feet, which is over 50 metres. And with a whole lot of people power throughout New Zealand, we managed, little Southlanders, managed to stop the raising of Manapori or reduce it to 50 metres. So I say more power to us as a council and to the people of Christchurch to make sure that we do rein in the huge impacts of climate and ecological, coming disaster. The recent information we have from regarding the fast melting of the ice cap in Antarctica is nothing short of alarming. Scientists are talking about that there's potential of possibility of sea level rise even going to 2 metres within the 100 years. That is a massive alarm. It is very concerning. This is an emergency, and I urge all councillors to support all of the recommendations.
Councillor Jimmy Chin.
Thank you. Yeah. We are all aware, recently the global warming, sea level rise, natural disaster, flooding frequently compared to the last decade. That's true. That's a fact. But if we review the council, we released last year strategic framework. We established 6 strategic priorities, 4 of them in relation to the environment. The environment, that's all priority. Community outcome, that's 1 of 4, healthy environment. But we particularly highlight this sustainable use of resources. But these 4 strategic priorities, you can see 1 of them particular specified very clearly climate change leadership. So as a civic leaders, we should taking a lead. Especially, I was very impressed back to the 15th of March this year. I and several fellow councillors, we went to the Cathedral Square. We saw all those teenagers, young people. They kind of struck for our the environment, the particular concern of environment. So that's true, So I was very impressed. Even one probably, I thought probably, I'm not sure, it's year 6 or year 7, so younger. I was very touched by them. And also probably tomorrow, they have a similar strike again. And also, if we back to the 11th of April, those Extinction Rebellion, they make a deputation. Even Monday of this week, they make this deputation in our innovation and the sustainable development committee, we were very impressed, their request. Ask a council as a civic leaders, we should taking a lead to declare this climate and ecological emergency. But that's true. And also up to now, we are all aware there are more than 500 cities already done. But in nationwide, probably I was told ECAN last week, they have declared, and also the Nielsen, the city council. So we should take a lead. Otherwise, we are behind the community, behind the young people, behind the, our wide community expectations. That's very, very the crucial and the important. So I urge the mayor and our councillors, we take this issue seriously. Your animals to support, declare this the climate, the ecological, and the emergency. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Galloway.
Thank you. So why today should we join with many other cities around the world and declare a global climate and ecological emergency? Firstly, the decision aligns to at least 3 of our council strategic priorities, particularly climate change leadership, and our hopes for our community to be one that is a city that values the voice of our children and young people. Today, we must acknowledge and show that we value the voice of our young people who are pleading with us in a variety of ways to do more. We need our young people to be involved in active citizenship, to engage with civics and democracy, and to pass this today, we will be saying to them that this is worth their effort. However, by making the decision today, we must also build hope. We don't want to add to our residents' burden by adding to their anxiety. This is an opportunity to build hope. Let's be a council that is a hope broker. We can do this by showing leadership. We need to communicate to our city and our community what we are already doing, and to show them ways that they can get involved to make a difference in our city, in our community. I'd like to finish just by quoting David Attenborough, who said, "If my grandchildren were to look at me and say, 'You were aware species were disappearing and you did nothing. You said nothing,' that, I think, is culpable. I don't know how much more they expect me to be doing. I'd better ask them." Well, we don't need to ask our young people because they're here telling us what we need to do. So let's just get on and do it.
David East.
Thank you. Look, I have the privilege of representing people from the coastal ward of the city. In the last 9 years since our earthquake series began, many people of this part of the city have lived on edge with minimal or no change in their lives or advancement of earthquake-related issues post-earthquake. They now face many challenges with coastal hazards and climate change. The psychosocial status of many, as you will recall from Dr. John Cook's presentation last week, is precarious. Today we are proposing to make a declaration of climate change and ecological emergency. This is a fine notion, but I fear it is just that, a feel-good notion with little action or indicators attached to it. I fully recognise the need to address issues of climate change, but I'm firmly of the belief that we do not need to raise the subject to a level of hysteria. Extinction Revolution talk of serious impacts in 11 years has the potential to push our vulnerable population over the edge. Our country has one of the highest suicide rates in the world, and I have great concern that this declaration may give the wrong message and impact on an already disastrous national statistic. The paper before us identifies a number of advantages, such as raising awareness about climate impacts and greater focus on climate change actions. It also identifies a number of disadvantages, raising community concern in a city that has already dealt with many recent emergencies. This is the prime focus of my consideration for this resolution. Uncertainty about what declaring an emergency would mean or actually means, the level of preparedness required for our city to act at the scale of emergency that may be expected, the potential to undermine the level of engagement and support from the community. As a city, we are already exemplary in our approach to climate change, as seen in the note to the resolution. Carbon net neutrality targets higher than required. Climate change impacts considered in council reports, electric car fleets, sustainability is a high priority, sustainability and procurement policy. We're already leading the charge, and I don't see the need to declare an emergency. There have been many instances in the past decades of wild predictions of sea level rise and climate change, extreme cooling predictions, and now followed by extreme global warming predictions. Virtually all the alarmist predictions of the last 40 years have not eventuated. We're an extremely adaptive species and have the time to implement managed adaptive measures. That said, that's my personal view. In consideration of this resolution, my primary concern is for the well-being of the people in Christchurch. I find this declaration alarmist, and for many people in my ward, it is just another tipping point for an already fragile community. I won't be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you. Yanni?
By making this declaration today, we are standing in solidarity with each other, with our community, our city, our country, and our planet. The exploitation of Earth for economic profits at the expense of the environment is totally unacceptable, it is short-sighted, it is fiscally irresponsible, and it is morally and socially wrong. Our most valuable and yet most vulnerable asset is our environment. The recovery of Christchurch has to go on record as one of the most unsustainable recoveries in the world, knocking down perfectly good buildings, allowing urban sprawl across our versatile soils, refusing to fix the infrastructure to minimise its impact on the environment, not taking the opportunity to require upgrading of our old and cold housing stock to be energy efficient and healthy. The list could go on and on. The embedded energy destroyed and the additional requirement of resources equals a massive failure to be sustainable in any meaningful way. What a lost opportunity. Where we could have and should have been unique and special, the first 22nd century city that was a modern showcase of how to be sustainable and environmentally friendly using clean and green technologies across everything we do. Just imagine if instead of spending a fortune on a convention centre in the middle of town, we invested in our environment and built an unconventional centre in the middle of the red zone that was carbon neutral and totally self-sustaining. Many years ago, I heard an interview with Dick Smith, the founder of Dick Smith Electronics' claim to fame. He made points that resonated with me, and this was in 1982 when he flew in a helicopter solo across the Atlantic. As part of that journey of seeing the world firsthand, flying over towns, cities, farms and factories, he commented, "Before people talked of climate change, I said, I can't believe they were not completely wrecking the world, because as I flew, most of the time it was in a smog or smoke, the amount of clearing that was going on, the huge cities you could see, 5 billion people were damaging the earth tremendously." That was 1982. He noted that an alternative to perpetual growth is an economic system that values quality over quantity, and that it should be about quality of life rather than consumption. I make that point because we have a choice as a city, and we've got things like the urban development strategy, where the majority of people did not want urban sprawl, and in fact that's instead what we got. People they wanted consolidation, and they wanted not a dispersed growth model. The question of what is the cost, who pays, and who benefits is seldom considered. The cost to our city and our country, not if, but when something goes wrong, will be horribly expensive and long-lasting. As Christchurch NZ, a company that we own, we set the targets of increasing GDP and increasing population, and I don't think that that's the right way to go. So in conclusion, the current course of action, in my view, is of great concern. And that's why we need to support this today. We are privileged and we are in a leadership position, and I wholeheartedly endorse that we must look at what we can do as individuals and as a city. We can make a difference, and we do have choices. It is simply unacceptable to put our future at risk with activities that harm and hurt rather than help and nurture our planet. Kia kaha.
Are there any, Dion?
Yeah, the science is irrefutable, and human climate change is happening, or human influenced climate change is happening. Thanks for to the person who put this bit of research on my desk about volcanoes and their impact when they go bang. It is major, but a volcano can't make a choice like us humans can, and today we make a choice. For the past million years or so, the carbon in our atmosphere has gone up and down, with the climate following, and the levels of sea level usually rising in between those as well. So it has happened, and it does happen. But humans are pushing the level of carbon in the atmosphere to a place that researchers say that hasn't been here for 55 million years. The last time the carbon in the atmosphere was this high, sea levels were 100 metres higher than they are now. We do have a major problem. Is this emergency? Is it the right word? An emergency usually is defined from the unexpected requiring immediate action, or is it a crisis which says that it's a time when you need to make difficult decisions? They're kind of both. The situation facing the world is not unexpected. Humans have known about we have known about human influence on climate for decades. We know emergencies in Christchurch. Last time we had a major emergency here, there was a top-down approach by government agencies that was set up. Do we really want the Climate Emergency Response Agency to be set up? Another SERA coming down heavy-handed on us. We all know how successful that was last time. This time we must actually bring the communities along with us. Not just the communities for the communities, but for all of the species of our planet that don't have a voice. There is a climate crisis. And are we prepared to make the hard decisions? A lot of the focus is on the 53% transport emissions. Diesel emissions from our rebuild have skyrocketed since the rebuild has started. That will come down. Can we influence it? Can we influence people using cars and their petrol? The plan could be a start. Electric cars are increasing, and we have funded charging infrastructure as an electric car owner. I find this encouraging, and it influences people to get that choice. But I am also acutely aware that my transport choice for using zero emission here is a problem somewhere else in the world. Act local, think global. 21% of our transport emissions are just from the airport and port alone. We own both those assets. What are we going to do about that? There is an area that we can influence now. We are about to potentially own the residential red zone. If we're serious about climate change and this emergency, we'd plant the whole thing in trees. That would soak up 4% of our total emissions in our city. Are we prepared to do that? We need to start thinking about the wider area as well. But regardless of what happens now, this doesn't mean it needs to cost the city. There is a 1 billion trees program by the government. There is funding for trees. We can do these things. We need to enable sustainable choices in all of our decision makings, work together to do what is right by us, the people that don't have a voice, and also all of the species that do not have a voice.
Thank you. Well, I might just go first because I was.
Leanne, yeah.
Oh, James.
Yeah, if I may.
Yes.
Thanks. Also, are your amendments up there, or because I'm not sure what the amendments are?
Well, I can. Well, perhaps I will go first.
Okay.
If they're not my amendment, I think the mover and seconder are going to accept them as part of the resolution. So, which is a great outcome.
Oh, it's just built into it.
All right. So I'll commence. So I do apologise for the lateness in this edition. However, the mover and seconder have accommodated this, and I do apologise. And thank you both to the mover and seconder for allowing me to do this. I noted that the purpose of the Chair's report was for the Council to acknowledge the following: that the planet was in crisis, that the consequences of global temperature rising above 1.5 degrees are severe, and that cities have a large responsibility in addressing climate change. And the points that I would make is that the resolutions as they stood didn't actually do that. And second, cities are not independent of their citizens. Unless citizens take action themselves, little will change. And we need people to understand what it is that they can do for themselves and for others and for the planet. The declaration of an emergency, and I'll pick up on what Dion said then, must not be mistaken for someone taking over, as was our experience in the earthquake environment. And I think that the earthquake recovery stands as a glaring example of how you wouldn't do things ever again. And I think that it is really important that there is a community agency. Communities have got really powerful capabilities, and they do need to be facilitated and supported so that they can take action for themselves. And I also agree with Yanni in terms of what he said about the impact of not having communities leading the way and having others essentially dictate what will happen when it comes to sustainability. I've just returned from Tokyo, as Raf has mentioned, where I participated in 2 events, the Urban Resilience Forum, where I focused on reinforcing the centrality of community leadership in all aspects of building resilience, whether it's disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and the two are absolutely interrelated, as is sustainable development, health promotion and community development, and the community is at the heart of each and every one of them. The second was the Urban 20 Symposium. The communique, which will be presented to the G20 next month, states that climate change is the most pressing challenge of the 21st century, not only because of the irreversible effects it has on ecosystems, but also because of its impacts on livelihoods, resources and food security, displacement and social inequalities. The communique highlights the need for citizen participation at every level. So climate action is the first but not the only point of the communique. It talks about the importance of social cohesion. It says that not addressing social inclusion comes with a considerable social and political cost, especially for cities. And finally, it raises the need to focus on sustainable economic growth, inclusive growth, if you will, to ensure that no one is left behind. And I would like us to consider what this means after the government announces our first wellbeing budget next week. We've heard the left behind narrative here in Christchurch, most significantly, as Councillor East said, from our coastal communities in the east. I do not want any of them to think that we are not committed to providing them with the tools to develop adaptive planning approaches that enable them to work through all of the issues with us, so we co-create the coastal hazards chapter in a productive and meaningful way, learning from each other. I won't have lip service paid to what was missing from the district plan review and the imposition of the government's priorities over those of the people of our city and district. And finally, the cost. Ironically, the cost will only increase if we don't take action now. For every $1 invested in resilience, there is a return of between $4 and $10. The sums add up, it makes sense, and we must support the declaration today. James.
Thank you. You'll see from the report that I voted against the emergency declaration, and I do apologise for repeating what I said at the Monday meeting, but I do so for the benefit of those of you who weren't there. So we need to get this out of the way first and foremost. Is climate change real? Yes. Do humans play a part in it? Yep. And as a council, do we take it seriously? And yes, most definitely, I believe we do. So from my vantage point, here's what we're doing in this space. We have a goal to be carbon neutral by 2030, a full 20 years earlier than the aim of draft legislation that's not only for our country, but that of the United Kingdom and France. We operate in the 6-star green building, right here, the Civic building. You don't get through the front door with council procurement processes unless you have your own robust sustainability policy. We've changed to a fully electric shared vehicle fleet. Environmental sustainability is a major feature in our own strategic priorities, and it's embedded in our decision making. We also drive this through to our council-controlled trading organisations via their statements of intent, every single one of them. My genuine fear around declaring the climate emergency from a bit of experience is that to demonstrate that it's not just a meaningless gesture, you're going to have to place considerable resource into doing things differently. And if it's not backed up, then it has the potential to be seen as just a publicity stunt. I don't think that you could blame someone for coming to the conclusion that this could then contribute to a rates rise by stealth, or that additional charges are then put in place that haven't been consulted on. So councils often tackle every good cause under the sun, and it's when this happens that you see the fundamentals fall by the wayside. They become terribly inefficient, and rates continue to soar at levels that can't be sustained. And unfortunately, that sounds all too familiar. So our infrastructure program is suffering, our business and investor confidence is suffering, and we have projected rates rises in our own long-term plan of around 50% over the next 10 years. So I'd be up for declaring a rates emergency, but what I don't want to happen is to burden ratepayers or to send the signal that when in reality our climate change initiatives demonstrate that we do take it seriously, that they've been consulted on and budgeted for. And what you can't tell me as a Christchurch citizen or as a councillor that's been through far too many emergency responses, what an emergency looks like. The fact is, what we've experienced, and many of you around this table have too, we've experienced a dictatorial approach. We've been shut out of the conversation, it's been top down, and there's been nothing remotely inclusive about it. It's an appalling thing to go through, and you wouldn't wish that upon anyone. So I would like to work to tell the positive stories of what we're doing and explore more where appropriate, but in my view the only way to be able to do that and to respond effectively to the challenges of climate change is via a hand-in-glove approach with our community. And I honestly don't believe that we need to declare emergencies to do that. So I'll be voting against the recommendations because, in my opinion, these sorts of bold declarations are well outside of the scope of a council's core business, and as a result may have some less than desirable consequences.
Vicky?
Just on the whole thing, I think all of us know that there is a climate and ecological crisis. I don't think anybody debates that. And we actually live in a world where we are actually wantonly destroying species. But the tragedy for humans is that they're actually dependent on their species for their well-being and for their very life. Just as Councillor East said, yes, 30 years ago people predicted this. Sadly, they were completely right. And what we've done in the meantime, incredibly selfishly, is that we've used up most of the world's carbon budget. So we have 11 years left of the world's carbon budget before we go above 1.5 degrees of warming. I don't know what could be an emergency if that isn't. I understand that people don't like higher rates, but I wouldn't quite put it in the same category as actually the extinction of species on such a scale. I mean, it strikes me as incredible that humankind, as such an intelligent and adaptable species, is actually willingly walking into this crisis, that it's made itself. It strikes me as absolutely incredible. And I cannot, that's why I think that it's really important, the resolution that we put there, and I'm fine with Leanne's additions, about climate change action and safe and sustainable water, which I'd put on a parity with it because it will also be affected by climate change, as the two key priorities for this council and everything we do. So the lens through which we will look at things is that lens. The point that Leanne made about $1 spent now saves $4 later on has been made so many times by commentators on climate change. So the rates emergency will become bigger and bigger, Councillor Goff, if we don't act now. The longer we leave this, the more it costs, not only in terms of people's lives, people's well-being, the species' well-being, the ecology's well-being, but also the cost, the actual economic cost. It's seldom that we've seen the climate costs and the environmental costs on the same line. But whatever we do, it has to be quick because the costs, if we leave it, are far, far, far too high. And I don't know of anybody who can actually look at their kids and say, you're not worth saving, and this planet isn't worth saving, and humans aren't worth saving, and all those other species that we are knowingly extinguishing aren't worth saving.
Aaron?
Yeah, I've lost a bit of sleep over this one recently. Like literally woken in the night considering how I would go on this, because in my role at the DHB, I get to see how much anxiety is in our community and in our people at the moment. I know the suicide stats. I know what the police numbers are for the call-outs per day, not per week, per day. It is through the roof, and I'm always cautious of language where you're telling people the world is going to end, or that their life is going to be cut short, or the lives of their families is going to be cut short, because it is very scary language. What I've known since I was a child is I actually always enjoyed a protest myself when I was younger. I remember going to town one day and joining an anti-nuclear protest in 1983 just because it was there, and I got to go right at the front with my friend on our bikes, no helmets, but it was the year before the law change, and then the following year joining a demonstration, a Hugs demonstration, which was heterosexuals unafraid of gays. I joined because I didn't know what a heterosexual was, and so I went along because my school friends were there. It made sense, you know, I've lived a plant-based diet for the last 17 years. My whole landscape at home, except my lawn's edible. If I had a goat, that'd be edible too. It's when the one time I was ever chair of a committee at this council was only as an acting chair for a few months, and based on a deputation from Spokes, brought forward a cycleways plan that was to not be finished till 2040, to be done within 5 years. And there's a targeted rate in your rates, which is there because of that. Tried to bring in Plan B, which was to have a sustainable bee policy for the city, lost by 1 vote, so got stung. It's one of those things that I do feel that in some way I'm some form of environmentalist. I did know when I was a kid that the environment was really important, and everyone knows that sucking on the end of a tailpipe will kill you. It is not a good thing. It is really dirty, dangerous industry, but also anxiety is a killer too, and we have to, contrary to what Yanni said, we're not standing in solidarity. The whole country, the whole city, the whole world doesn't believe this. If it did, we would adopt, like Pauline said, carless days, would adopt them tomorrow. But so there's a journey to go on yet, and we need to take people with us, not tell them that it's happening. And the council, and I'll get Jed and stuff, but the council contradicts itself all the time, and we often over-design and over-spec things that cost way more. And if something costs you more financially, it costs the environment more as well, because resources cost money. So if you're burning resources to do something, you're burning money. And so if we could cut our cloth a little tighter, we'd be a lot more environmentally sustainable and would save a lot more carbon.
Thank you. Mike?
Thanks. Today we acknowledge that climate urgency is required and action needed. This council has already shown clear leadership when it comes to climate change action. Cycleways, bus lanes, shared electric cars, carbon neutral targets, just to name a few. But at the same time, motorways are still being built to the north and south of the city, while cycleways get delayed, even though completed cycleways are proving a success. The city's public transport is simply not working, and the growth in ownership and use of petrol and diesel vehicles continue to trend upwards every year at a rate greater than the growth of population. In Christchurch, transport creates the most emissions at 53.1%, and the opportunities in this space to reduce our carbon footprint is significant and straightforward. Encouraging the uptake of other forms of transport is key. Walking, biking, car sharing, public transport. We need to improve the walkability of Christchurch, complete our cycleways, and take public transport off ECAN so it can actually work for the people of Christchurch. With an upcoming decision shortly on the downstream effects management plan of the Northern Corridor, a climate emergency should alert councillors to how crazy this car-centric project is. A declaration today sends a clear message to central government that Christchurch is serious and action is needed, and we can't do this alone. It lets the people of Christchurch know we are serious about what we are facing, but the most important thing is we need to take the people of Christchurch with us. The development of a climate strategy needs to be transparent and involve the people of Christchurch. We can't do this alone, and we must do it together. I'll be supporting the climate emergency today, and this is to stimulate both action and open discussion. A climate emergency is about accepting that there is a major crisis facing us and our planet, and we as leaders have the ability to make a difference. It's not about raising rates, it's about creating a new BAU, one that benefits both the people of Christchurch and our environment. It's about being fully informed when making decisions, including the impact on the environment. We all say how important our environment is, yet make decisions that have negative impacts on it. I'll be supporting this declaration of climate and ecological emergency. I've always had an environmental lens on the decisions I make, and I hope this will encourage a number of my fellow councillors to start walking the talk.
Councillor Tim Scandrett.
Thank you. In every walk with nature, one receives far more than one seeks. John Muir, and that is so true of our environment and our world. A global climate ecological emergency. You can debate the word emergency all you want, but there is change happening and it's not for the positive, so we must do something. The argument about rates, you could see it in a term of very small-minded, short-sighted with regards to the global economy and the environment. But every family has a right to be able to live well, feed their family, clothe their children, etc. So with regards to the argument of rates increases, we as a council in the small, short-sighted would have to look at cutting our cloth to make sure that we can deliver that with the sight, the big picture of the global change that we've got to do our bit with. In the larger context, we as Christchurch, Canterbury, the South Island, our nation, we also have to encourage our government to support those communities who are supported by industries that are negative to the climate, such as Taranaki's offshore drilling and the West Coast coal. We cannot expect communities to live in poverty to sacrifice their cost of living or their level of living. So we've got to encourage our nation, and if there's heavy lifting there by all of us, let's do it, to change their industry and upskill their workers so we can all live a good and high level of life with our children, our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren in a safe environment. There is no question I'll support this, but we've got to do it with respect to all. Thank you.
Right, I'll just let Sarah close the debate then. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as right of reply, I've just got a few comments to make on some of the points that have been raised. Councillors Mangy and Swiggs are right. You know, the words climate emergency probably aren't quite right for the Christchurch example, but they are part of the global solidarity movement. They're the right words to send a message to those with greater power than us to act, and it gives them the mandate to do so. We don't need to declare an emergency to act, but declaring it enables others to do so as well. And Councillor Kewen, these words are not doom and gloom. They're up your hands and give up words. They're a call to action. And you and Councillor Easter are also right in one way. It is the well-being of our residents that needs to be at the heart of our decision-making. And that is why we must make sure that they know the truth and that we work with them to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. Because the truth is, climate change itself will have enormous consequences on community health and well-being. Rising seas and larger storms are already raising anxiety, and hopeful action from all of us is the antidote to paralysis. Inaction is not an option. Councillor Goff is also right. We are doing some things as a council with our own emissions, but we can do more than that. We have influence on many parts of the way that the city operates, from buildings, lighting, waste and transport. If emissions are still going up, we are not doing enough. And we fully intend to back this declaration up with action. While I acknowledge we get a lot of requests to back a variety of causes, I cannot think of a better one to support than saving our planet for our children and our grandchildren to inherit. Council's core business. Its legal obligation under the Local Government Act is to make decisions in the best interests of both current and future generations, and that's why we need to declare today.
Right, so I'll just run through the resolution so that people are aware. So we've got the resolution about declaring a global climate and ecological emergency, and the purpose of this is to raise public awareness about the urgency of the need for everyone to take action to reduce carbon emissions to zero, and to highlight the importance of engaging our communities to better prepare ourselves for the impacts of climate change, including undertaking mitigation measures and co-creating adaptive planning tools. So these are the issues that have been raised. Acknowledge the IPCC's special report that warming beyond 1.5 degrees will be harmful to people and the life-supporting systems of the planet, and noting that the transformational changes that we need to see are not yet evident. And we acknowledge the urgency of taking climate action, the need for democratic participation in establishing these targets and mechanisms for achieving them to ensure a just and equitable transition, and that's picking up on a number of points that have been raised. The need for the city to participate in these global city networks that exist and other New Zealand cities, major New Zealand cities, to ensure that we're sharing ideas and solutions, as well as reinforcing the responsibility of cities for taking action, and then requesting council officers to look at or to develop a workshop on progress towards the updated climate strategy, and obviously Sarah Templeton and her role will play a part in that being organised, but an assessment of the wellbeing budget. It's the first wellbeing budget next week, and that needs to be considered in the light of our commitment to climate change leadership. A comprehensive overview of all of the initiatives that are required to contribute to climate change leadership, and that's picking up the transport and all of those issues, and achieving that citywide and district-wide. So there's your Greater Christchurch area, the stronger coalitions required with councils, agencies, businesses and citizens, and then an analysis of the particular recommendations that have come forward from the Student Strike for Climate and Extinction Rebellion and other groups, with a view to developing an appropriate strategic framework, etc., and then the balance of them are as per. Gonna scroll? Sorry, yeah. So four we've changed to questions to be developed for inclusion in the annual residents' survey on action that is taken on climate change at the community level as well as at the city level. So that's actually asking people what they're doing, not just what they think about what we're doing, and requesting further advice to come back through the ISD meetings, and the City Council approaching local councils. That's picking up other amendments that have been incorporated, and Yanni's one there at number 7, and then noting the work that's been done. These are included in the original recommendation. So I will put that resolution. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Would you just put your hand up for no?
Division, please.
I've just asked them to put their hand up for no. So the opposing the resolution is David East, James Goff and Aaron Kewen. So I declare the resolution carried. Thank you. I now declare the meeting closed.